he's a house whip.
Good morning. You're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah. We are also streaming live on newhavenindependent.org. You can also catch our live Facebook streams on the New Haven Independent Facebook page as well as MWN Radio Facebook page. And I want to welcome you to the show on this beautiful Wednesday morning. We are here this morning, and you know it's Wednesday because it's your Wednesday morning voice. And we are talking with Reverend William Mathis this morning. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Reverend. He is a pastor of the Spring of Life Giving Water Church on Spanish Street in New Haven. He also runs a nonprofit called WLM Ministries, has worked with a U.S. Rep Charles Rango, and graduated from Harvard Divinity School. He's a former director of Project Longevity, a federal and state and city program to reduce gang violence. He works in the community on racial justice issues and many issues around with formerly incarcerated individuals. And that is just a snippet of his bio. I looked up the bio and I was like, wow, that's the whole show if I read all of that. So, very, very impressive with all of his advocacy and his community work. And when I thought about doing a show about Juneteenth and systematic racism and just talking about the issues of Black America, you were the name that came to mind, and so it was like, we got to get the record.
Well, I am happy that you chose me. I'm humbled by what I believe God has just opened door after door of opportunity for me. And so part of my commitment, not only to my people, but also to community, is my way of giving back and showing gratitude to God for what He's done. One correction, though, one thing I'm very proud of, the Springs of Life Giving Water Church, we purchased our own property now, and we are now located in the Hill South section at Howard and Lamberton Street.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Moving on up.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. That's wonderful. So first, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into advocacy work? Is this something that you've done since you were young? Like, tell us a little bit about your history in being an advocate for the community.
I think it was natural for me. I grew up in the Deep South, in particular Albany, Georgia. Albany was one of the places that they said that King failed and the movement failed in. And that's questionable, but nevertheless, it was a very active city, and so were my family was very much involved. The church I grew up in was very much involved, and so it became a natural flow of who I was. However, though, I kind of always knew I wanted to do advocacy. I was headed toward law school. Those are the things that I thought would fit me well, but it really happened, I guess, I was a senior in high school. By that time, we were integrated. I was a predominantly white school. I was president of the student body, and I took on an issue around an assistant coach who happened to be African American as well. And that didn't sit too well with the Board of Education, neither my principal and head guidance counselor. And so that kind of really began the advocacy, the protest, the radical Bill Mathis, and it got its lunch from there. And I think it was just only reinforced as a result of my being at Morehouse College and being surrounded with other people from around the world who also saw those issues as important and should be a part of whatever we do.
Awesome. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is just the issue about Juneteenth and its history and its significance. But the interesting thing about just your particular history is you growing up so far in the Deep South. When we think of Deep South a long time ago, we think of all of the racism, both systematic, overt. There was no hiding it. And then going to Morehouse College, and what that educational experience must have been like. Because for me personally, I have to be honest, I actually did not know what Juneteenth was until I was an adult. Like, it was just, I never even mentioned to me. We were like, oh, slavery ended in 1863. And we just thought that was the truth.
Yeah.
So that must have been an interest. How was that experience of, or your experience of learning about Black history from Georgia to Morehouse? How was that experience?
Again, I do think that there is a difference because now, since I graduated from high school, I've never really lived back home in Albany. I see a family there, I go back regularly, etc. So I've had the benefit, if you will, of two worlds: the northern urban life, particularly in the Northeast, and the deep South, segregated South. Life in Georgia. I think the difference, based upon that comparison, my awareness, our awareness was much more communal and therefore much more in line with, I think, what traditional ways of communication and connection, storytelling, the fellowship from house to house, and etc. And so information was passed that way. Also, it was important in my home, it was important in my community, it was important in my church, just not to understand that we were Americans, but that we were Black people and we had a rich history that was beyond slavery. Also, for a portion of my educational experience in elementary and middle school, etc., I was in a segregated school. And so I knew all the teachers. They knew me. They knew my family. We all fellowship. If we didn't go to the same church, we fellowship one another. And a part of what was integrated in our educational experience was also things about us. That was the most striking thing from Morehouse to Boston College Law School to Harvard, and in my exchange with my brothers and sisters who may have been in undergrad programs in Boston College or Harvard, is that you had to specifically take an additional class to learn about Black people and their contributions. Whereas at Morehouse, when I studied humanities, I studied Plato and Aristotle, but I also studied Black people as well. They were part of the same program. It wasn't separate and distinct or some special day or a week in the curriculum. And so I do think that has been the difference of knowing, if you will, more about those things that were significant to our struggle and to our progression here in America. I think it had a lot to do with the community that because we were forced to teach us about us. And then, secondly, going to a place like Morehouse that prided itself in a whole well rounded education that was inclusive and not necessarily exclusive or special to us.
That is really fascinating. So that's really interesting because there is this new debate on whether or not whether or not the public school system really served Black kids. And the idea of a lot of parents, one of the upcoming shows that we have is parents talking about, Black parents in particular, talking about why they chose to homeschool. And that's one of the things that I hear the most often is that, you can integrate your own history into your child's education. And that is significant. I think that makes a huge difference.
Well, I think all of us can admit, whether we're Black or white, whether or not we're conservative or liberal, that one's self-esteem is critical to one's advancement and one feeling whole about himself. And if you're in school, and particularly a public school in a city like New Haven that is majority people of color, and you have some side issue or it is not fully integrated and you never really hear or learn anything about positive contributions, and then on top of that you see television and all you see are drug dealers and people who are violent and who are being arrested and we're looking for, and the positive people you see for the majority of the day all don't look like you. I mean, what? I don't know what we would expect from our children, because when there's a low self esteem and they're not being reinforced and not being made to feel confident about who they are, they then adapt to who other people define them to be.
That's a great way of putting it. That's really profound. That's a great way of putting it. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. This is Mornings with Mubarakah, and we are talking with Reverend William Mathis of the Spring of Life Giving Water Church. That's a little tongue twister,
Yeah,
a little bit,
yeah.
just a little bit. So, my initial subject, I don't want to get off track here because I'm like, wow. Well, he is a pastor, so he might mesmerize us with his articulation here. So I'm trying to stay on track.
As Daddy King said, I'm just trying to make it plain.
Juneteenth is the 19th of June. 1865. And tell us a little bit about the history of it and the significance.
Part of it, and this is not necessarily an excuse, it's just the context of the time. We're traveling and getting to Texas, in particular, that the war was over and that the slaves were free, and etc. Is kind of the part of the backdrop. Actually, I was watching a movie. I'm a movie buff, and I was watching the Free State of Jones, and it was poor whites and blacks who had combined together and quote unquote succeeded for the Confederacy and was fighting the Confederate Army, and was soliciting minimal help from General Sherman and the Union troops. And it was also a kind of like a delayed kind of thing when they got the information that the war was over, and then also when they got the information that we all get 40 acres and a mule, and that never materialized. And so it's a delay in communication. I see symbols of that in our modern day experience, because I think there are those of us, and I would include myself in those of us, who have been fairly educated, who have networks and access to information. Uh, what we do with it, whether we do anything with it or not, is another question, but we have access to the information. But the majority of people who the information is supposed to benefit generally don't get it until delayed fashion. And once they get it in a delayed fashion, then the opportunity to see stuff and to do things is now gone. I.e., maybe that is kind of the history of how that. I.e., that was when I was in Project Longevity. They were looking for creating jobs and skills for reentry people, and they were doing medical data input. Now Yale is laying off in the IT department and etc. because the information that some of us had before, that's only limited. That will not sustain a living wage for those families and keep them in a holistic kind of way. But the information to the people is thought, well, great, somebody's gonna give me a job and give me some training. I'm gonna get a job, and so they get the job, and now with the layoffs and etc., they are now frustrated. So
they came to the party late.
They came to the party late. We get to the party late. And part of that, I don't necessarily blame those who are non-color totally. I also blame many of us who have that kind of access and who have that kind of information. Again, very different from my upbringing in the South as opposed to my living in the urban centers Northeast. Down South, the lawyer, the doctor, the garbage man worker, the farmer, everybody saw themselves as community. And so we did what we needed to do, not just to lift up myself or my family, but our entire community. I never will forget going away to college. People that I would come home on Sundays to church, people give me $5 if I get me a Pepsi. They give me $20 if I get a book. They wanted to make sure I was doing. And they were not necessarily my family. I went to church with them. There were people in the community. People do because I was getting a degree from Morehouse College, not just me, but it was a degree that was significant for the entire community in which I operate. And I think when we have information, we make the information available at the time when it's appropriate for us to seize that information and do something with that information. Medical inputting was not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. But I think if we had have taken the information we had and did something to build a sustainable thing through that, we should be training our people around medical technology. That's the move here in New Haven. That's the import of other people coming to the community, and they are now moving us into the suburbs. Again, access to information and receiving information delayed. And so all of us will be living out there when all of the services and support to a quality of life will be in the city.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot to think about. You gave me a lot.
I'm sorry.
Gave me a lot.
That's why I don't have a whole lot of shows.
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. Absolutely correct. Right on the money, though.
Yeah.
That I think.
So when we talk about that community, which we have lost to a significant extent in African American community, how do we get back there? How do we get back to your success is my success?
I think we have to be intentional. I do think faith-based communities are critical, even though our numbers may be declining, in particular among millennials in our community. It is still the most significant institution in our community that we pretty much own lock, stock, and barrel. So I do think faith-based communities play an important role of fellowship. Fellowship of people from all different strata, economic stratas, but also of all kinds of faith. Uh, the issues, I'm not suggesting that there were never issues, of course, between faith and principle and practice and etc., but they were not as significant until we became integrated. Um, and not to say that integration is a bad thing. Integration the way it worked is a bad thing because it really fell in line with assimilation as opposed to total integration. I can be who I am and be accepted as a part of that. So I do think faith-based communities, even though we are not all monolithic and not all believe the same thing, is a great opportunity for there to be an exchange and fellowship and the coming together of community. That takes the leaders, though, of those faith-based communities to understand the necessity of community within our people. As I do some work with my nonprofit around the globe, in particular in Latin America as well as on the continent. In a number of places where I do work, there are things that were very, very similar to my growing up in Albany, Georgia, in Deep South. That's because we're communal people by nature. That's why we're forgiving people. That's why people generally take advantage of us because we see community as important naturally. And, and so what I'm suggesting is that faith-based communities could play a significant part in that because it still has a large chunk of our community, and that they should. One of the things could be doing is they should be initiating and intentionally building bridges across those divides, that integration and other people who are not necessarily of our best interest. I would dare say that would be between the Christian and the atheist, like Muslim, Islamic communities. I think that's wrong. Beyond straight and gay and lesbian and bisexual community. I think that should be between those from the upper class, highly educated, and those who had, they don't hit the economic map, and those who don't have, who have not had the advantage of education. I think we should be intentional about building those bridges.
And so we've talked about this intentionality of building community. What's the way to get people on the same page? Because all of those communities that you mentioned, there are some significant divides.
Yes.
We know African American have a very contentious relationship with the LGBTQIA. I think I got all that.
I didn't even try.
I think I got it. Community. And there's like all of these separations. Is it the is it the leaders? Is it the people? Is it who is that person to step in and say, hey, this is the first brick for the bridge?
Yeah, I do think it is our leaders. I think probably on ground we'll find that there are more connections and quote unquote community than we really think. I think it's the leadership who, because this has been the position that we have taken, and in my own faith community, there are of us who have been talking and discussing and having intellectual intercourse about these kinds of things that suggest to us that we're allowing other people to drive our narrative instead of us driving our own. So I do think that leaders could move the ball much quicker, but I do think on ground level, some of that is happening. For instance, I am a part of a group, and this is not necessarily a group led of color, but a part of a group in which there have been opportunities for Christians and Muslims to sit down and talk about issues just right here in New Haven. And where we have had opportunities to share, both in meal and in fellowship. I think fellowship is critical and important to building anything and developing and mending bridges. And I feel the better because of it. And it challenges me in my own thinking and our own rhetoric, sometimes that comes out without thinking because we've been so set in such a way that it challenges me to 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 move the ball further. I do think those kinds of engagements are the kinds of things I'm talking about that I believe should be happening in our community and particularly among our leaders that help us to build those bridges, to mend those bridges one together. Because if you remember, I think if we look at history, segregation, we've always had a gay community, and there has been an active gay community. The Harlem Renaissance is evident about it. Are there tensions? Absolutely, there's some tensions. But it wasn't nothing that we couldn't work through and that we didn't celebrate each other as a result of it. And so instead of taking other people's narrative and trying to adopt it, we should kind of recapture ours and develop it. That's what I'm saying. And I think once we come together, we find out that we have shared experiences and thus we can move towards shared resolutions. To be very honest, as a Christian in my faith practice, that's how we just celebrated Pentecost. That's what happened on Pentecost. There were 120 people in an upper room, and they were there for 50 days. All we know is that they prayed and they selected somebody to fill Judas' spot. That praying, which I believe is just simple communication with God, and we all are in the image of God, communication and fellowship with one another, they eventually, according to the text, that when the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all on one accord in one place. And there came the rush of a mighty wind, the power of the Holy Ghost. And so that's
a powerful story of unity.
Yeah, and I think you cannot have unity if we continue to stay in our boxes. But the more we are committed, because we're naturally committed people, we naturally have connected, and we have shared experiences, it'll move us towards shared resolutions. That's the personal thing, and that's that's the theory behind some of the work that I do in WLM ministry. This shared experiences to shared resolutions.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah, where we're talking to Reverend William Mathis. I want to talk a little bit about your work with formerly incarcerated people. So we know that the prison system itself has been in the forefront of the news, thanks to 13th, thanks to the new Jim Crow book. And so I think people are actually starting to think about it more in terms of its impact on the larger society, particularly its impact on Black people. So we know statistics like the amount of Black people under the penal system today is the same amount that was enslaved the day before the Civil War. Um, it really creates a picture of a continual slavery. You know, it's really interesting that, so recently over the weekend I was a speaker at a Uganda American Muslim Association conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really interesting conversation on the way to the airport with a gentleman who's from Uganda. And his question was, why can't things change when the physical chains are no longer there? Like, what's happening with Black people in America? And we had a really interesting and I think very thought-provoking conversation about the difference between an African in America experience and an African American's experience. And that really, it got my thinking wheels a little bit more, and hopefully I explained it in the conversation was just as impactful for him. But the idea that there are the same amount of people that are in prison that was in slavery is really a very clear connection between the prison system and slavery. How did you get into this work? And what are some of the? I have a lot of questions, but tell me how you got into the work.
To be very honest, I stumbled into it. My last year at Morehouse, I knew I wanted to go into law school. Shirley Chisholm was visiting at Spelman, a sister school right across the street, and she was teaching in the political science department. So that was one of my majors, and so I took a class with Shirley Chisholm, and Ms. Chisholm really became a mentor. She got me the job with Charlie Rangel on the Select Committee on Narcotics Abuse and Control. And that began a kind of courtship, if you will, with work around prison, reentry, rehabilitation, all of those kinds of things. Because again, just as it is today, drugs are one of the leading causes of the incarceration, particularly of African American males. And if you would look at the statistics then, it's pretty much the same now. I do think Michelle Alexander, who is the author of The New Jim Crow, tapped into something. When I said earlier, when we got this information and we don't know what to do with it, and then when it eventually gets down, it's too late. She had the information and she put it out. And many of us who are working in the field, and I say us, I've always kind of been slightly radical, but I have patience. I try to work with you if I think you're trying to get to the appropriate end. But when I discover that you're really not trying to get to the appropriate end, then I kind of let loose. I've had that experience. I think she put it out because it is something that we seriously got to look at. Those numbers do not lie. We do have to deal with the fact of those who, quote unquote, in positions of power, who continue, and we got all kind of programs. So we didn't come up with wonderful ideas. We do this, we do that, and then the wind of the grant community will blow this way, and we're doing that, and we're doing that. But I think it's all a constructive effort to continue it as it is. It's just a new form of slavery. Now, for us, it's psychological slavery. And so a brother from Uganda or a brother from Trinidad and Tobago who can come here and it is a little different for them, it's because the mindset is different. Our mind, we are still psychologically chained to slavery. And again, this goes back to the education piece. If that's the only significant historical fact about who you are and what they teach you, what else you're going to think?
Right.
And I think contributing to this goes to this community piece. When I grew up, and I think even in urban communities probably early on, Black people of every educational stratum or economic stratum kind of all mingle with one another. When I left home, I didn't know we were poor because everybody in my community lived, and I knew the lawyer who lived over here in Georgia. All of us just kind of lived together. We have displaced, those of us who have been advantaged, we've displaced ourselves from community. So there are no active role models. There are no active people in the community that John can look up and say, I'm gonna be him one day.
Right. So when you make it, you move out of the hood, and that just leaves the hood by itself.
And so the drug dealer who is helping to pay the bills is the hero.
Yeah.
And so there's a psychological kind of thing, and it becomes a branding. That's how I become a man now, because I went to jail, or because I did this or I did that, and that continuously reinforced. Again, another significant role for faith-based communities and its leaders is to be honest with our people, not just about what would have been done to us, but what we must take in charge of ourselves in order if we're going to live. And stop allowing what is the wing of the grant community to drive the narrative of how we handle our stuff.
I think the funding of some of these programs that are impactful in reentry and preventing incarceration, do you think that it's something that should just naturally be inside of, say, the city or the state budget as opposed to the grant community? Because, this year reentry may be sexy, and then next year, something else may be sexy.
You hit it on the head. Right. I do think, given this is such a significant and critical a problem for an important block of our citizenry, that this should be something that's naturally built into our budget. That goes to, and I've been having my issues, I don't know if I'm a Democrat no more, I think what this last election taught us to, we just continuously being taken advantage of. We hold down the fort while the liberal white women wing can go to side. You know what? I think protection of my child is a little bit more important, and I think he's going to be tough on him. So I'm going to go in this booth. I told him I was going to vote for him, but I'm going to go in this booth. I'm going to vote for him because I think it's going to be better. And we'll get over him for 4 years and etc. And we got sold out.
Yep.
And we were holding up the bloodstained banner. Just in our faith on the bloodstained banner on that behalf. I do think again, that's why it's important that we begin to develop and nurture community, building the bridges within us, the things that other people and other things have caused division. Because if we're going to advance, it's going to be because we're intentional about our advancement. And we cannot leave that in the hand to the government. We cannot leave that in the hand of the grant community. It has to be in our hands where we are particularly invested. One of the things as a Christian, but also a very, very proud person of the African diaspora, that I had to reconcile, and I think my experience at Harvard Divinity School helped me to do that. I had to reconcile, if the God who is a God of love, that I believe is in control and is in charge of everything, how could he allow the Middle Passage? How could he allow the brutality of slavery, not known like this anywhere else in the world, to people whom you said out of Egypt, I'm going to call my son. I got to believe that God allowed us to go through the storm and the chaos because he believed we had the gifts and abilities to advance. We are now in the country and the most prosperous, and whether or not accepted or not, the leading country in the world, not travel the world, in country in the world. We should be seizing opportunities as a community to take the helm, to drive narratives, not just for us, but because the world we live in is becoming global. And if we don't seize the opportunity now, of those of us with all the necessary information, seize the opportunity now, then there's an increasing Asian effective communities moving all over the world. I was just in Paris last week at a conference, but also was talking with some colleagues and etc. We went to Chateau Rouge, which is the African immigrant community in Paris. And all of the shops are now owned by Asians.
Wow.
The African people are in the streets with boxes, putting their goods on the thing and scrambling when the local police come in because they no longer can afford the rent of the shops.
Wow.
The regentrification that's happening in Chateau Rouge, in the old historical buildings in that part of Paris, are being refurbished beautifully, but they no longer are living. A lot of African immigrants are living on the street.
Wow.
And that's not just in Paris. You can go to a number of cities around the world where that's happening. The major uprising in Brazil now has a lot to do with the fact that the majority of the nation is being straddled and is being ignored economically in what is an emerging economic power in the world.
Wow.
And so I think when we fail to drive our own narratives and leave it to governments and leave it to other people and great communities and where they are here and there to do it, we find ourselves always under the gun. We see temporary relief, but no sustainable joy. And I think when we come together, and God allowed us to go through what we went through here to have and to leverage what is of America in the rest of the world to lead and to be a participant in the emancipation, the freedom, the liberation, the advancement of Black people globally.
Well, I'm Muslim, but right now I'm gonna be like, amen. I gotta say amen to that, y'all. I gotta say amen to y'all.
Praise the Lord.
Praise him. Mathis got me praising him.
Don't you tell your husband that.
That was deep. I love that. And you're absolutely correct. One of the things that I personally always try to do is I look for Black businesses to support. Let's talk a little bit about kind of like on a practical level how Black people need to do that as far as empowerment. I think that now is an interesting time for Black people in America because with all of the political strife, with all of the political strife that we are going through, I think Black people, we were until a couple of weeks ago when Jeff Sessions started doing his decrees, kind of like flying under the radar. Muslims have been taking the forefront of discrimination. Immigrants have been taking the forefront of discrimination. During the election, it was a huge, spotlight on women treatment. And so my fear in this election cycle is that once again, we will get comfortable, but kind of like sitting by the sidelines. And then the way racism actually rears its head is in a very sneaky way. It's like the snake in the grass. You can't tell what's the grass and what's the snake because they're both green, but then Jeff Sessions comes and acts a congressional panel if he can pursue medical marijuana dispensaries in spite of states making it legal. When he recently said that he wanted to particularly pursue marijuana violations. And this has been a key form of getting people incarcerated. I have a statistic here that says that in the 1990s, 80% of the incarcerations of Black people had to do with marijuana. Like, that's a significant way of getting Black people in jail. So what are some of the practical things as we come to the last few minutes of our show that as a Black community we need to do to redefine and retell our own narrative?
I'm going to back into it, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what Jeff Sessions has done. Not necessarily what he's done, but what the reality of the fact. Well, the majority of people who use drugs in America are not Black people, are not people of color, are white. This is about what I believe is an intentionality of not necessarily the police force. I want to say our Black chief, police chief is just out to arrest Black people. There's some wonderful officers who happen to be of color and some who are not of color. But the policies in themselves like that are directed, because you're not going to go to my neighborhood in Beaver Hills and sit on the corner and watch people go in and out of houses, etc. But you will go into the trade and etc. and watch people going in the house and etc. And then eventually find some marijuana. So it's a policy. And I think we have to be strategic and smart enough as community, in particular our leaders, to to use a scalpel and go after policies and not necessarily always practices. I can't convince no white cop to be non-racial. If you are racist, you're a racist in your heart. I don't care if you're a police officer, you're a preacher. You're just racist. And so I'm not trying to convince you of that. What I am, because as a citizen, I'm going to ensure that the policies don't take on a structural racism framework that allows for what's inside of you to come out and use it in this sneaky kind of way. I think that's better done when we start coming together as a community and get over our little petty differences and start looking at policies and how they are structurally and systematically manifesting racism in our community. The other piece that you asked about was this sense of entrepreneur, black owned. And how do we build? I do think we have to build on an economic base so that we're not chasing the wind of what's the new grand idea and the new thing that we have to build our own base. There are some things that are happening here in New Haven that I don't think maybe that's part of our fault, that we have really not marketed well. But there's a group that came together called the Beloved Community. And it's a group of people of the African diaspora. Some people may call them leaders, but we just call our people ourselves committed to community. We start doing a Buy Black campaign one Black History Month, and then just continue. I'm like you. I try to look for a black business. Even to get a manicure, I try to find me a black business. Like going after here, as a matter of fact. My barber. When I go out to eat, when friends come to town, etc. We are limited. I think we can expand that. But again, I think building communities, and I think faith-based communities are critical to that, because they then can become sources, not the total source, but can be the sources of resources in order to do that.
Absolutely.
But again, that takes a mindset from the leader. I'm not interested in being in no photograph with the mayor or some politician. I'm interested in being in a position where we can leverage our resources so that we can own our own stuff and therefore drive our own narrative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. This was a really, I love it. This is one of my favorite interviews. Yep. I have to have you back on the show.
Yes, I'd be glad to come back.
I thank you. I appreciate you coming. And for everybody out there, I want to thank you for listening. This is Mubarakah Ibrahim reminding you to be a voice and not an echo. Oh, Carrie was like 2 minutes left. I was like, that's okay. I'm going to let him talk the whole time. Thank you. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I am so glad Jessica was like, this is the I was like, this is what I want to do. She was like, okay, you have to get Reverend Mathis. I'm so glad she told me that.
Yeah. I am glad that I came in.
So you said it's called the Beloved Community?
The Beloved Community.
I didn't know anything about that.
Actually, we're having a reception on Monday. I'll send you something. On Concat. It's myself, Howard Hill. You know Enola Ayers. She would be a good person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know Howard and Enola.
Enola, Barbara Tenney, Althea Marshall Brooks, Miss Jackie Bracey, Esther Armand. We've been meeting for about 3 to 5 years, and we've just been dealing with our own psychological change. We do circle. And then we've done a couple of functions where we try to just kind of introduce ideas around this racial equity and our understanding of who we are, our rich history beyond just slavery, and want to do some projects in community. And we fund our own sales. And you know Howard has a
nonprofit foundation.
Prosperity.
Do you prefer reverend or pastor?
It doesn't matter.
Me and Harry was having a conversation. I was like, I don't know, my Christian lingo is not that good. I don't know if one is like higher than the other. No, they're interchangeable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pastor is a person who pastors a church. Reverend is someone who's been ordained. That's right. And so a pastor is a reverend. But just remember what lingo you use. And
So is it like every pastor is not a reverend, but every reverend is a pastor?
every pastor should be a reverend. Every reverend may not be a pastor because every pastor should be ordained by someone.
Okay, but the reverend can be ordained but not necessarily have a church.
Right. That's
Right.
it.
See?
That's it.